There are literally a ton of Warhammer 40k video games out there. 30 years of licensing out your intellectual property helps to develop quite the back catalogue. But the scope of these titles kind of sucks. It's basically 1,000 strategy games and 8 shooters across 30 years. It's wild to me that that's all we've got, considering how quick Games Workshop seem to be keen to throw out the license to people. It's something I hear people echo online a lot. And to be fair, before I proceed, Magic the Gathering, my other favourite tabletop game, has like 10 video games total across 30 years. So Warhammer fans should count their lucky war-torn stars. So there's a lot of them. But across all of them, I think they do one thing wrong. Or at least none of them have successfully achieved one particular thing. And that's to engage with a sense of scale. Now, I'm of course not talking about large-scale battles. There's plenty of those. I say plenty. It's actually weird how few there actually are of that as well. But from the first Dawn of War, with its RTS base building and combat, to the Battle Sector, or perhaps Gladius, a large-scale turn-based strategy game. Bearing in mind I haven't played Gladius yet, it's on my list of things to play. Big battles aren't as common as you'd think, but there are a load if you go digging. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something else, an itch that these games have not scratched. In the last couple of years, I've got quite into the Warhammer Black Library books. I mean, I've probably only read around 16, maybe 18 of them at this point, but I've read a load of the Horus Heresy ones that focus both on the Marines, but also on the human protagonists. The first 3 Horus Heresy books talk a lot about the Remembrances and focus on them from first-person perspectives. You get to see the Imperium and the world from a perspective you don't often hear about when looking at the game through just the tabletop game. Watchers of the Throne as well has a whole POV character from someone that is not a Custodes or Sisters of Silence or Space Marine. When I say scale, I mean the other side of the epic scale. Not the glorious space wars of Battlefleet Gothic, but more so the sense of scale that comes from inhabiting the war-torn universe of the far-flung future. Of being dwarfed by your surrounding. Of the cosmic horror and the absurdist revelation that you are unimportant in the great game being played out above you in the stars. Or perhaps there's an even more hopeful version of that. That heroism and virtues of the individual can cut through and save lives. It's not the kind of story that I would write, but I get that people like that stuff. It resonates with them. You can tell stories that say you could make a difference, even in the face of crushing fascist dictatorships, theocratic dogma and bureaucracy. I'm not just talking about narrative perspectives here. I'm talking about seeing the world in a different light. For a start, seeing the worlds of Warhammer 40k from the ground level up just isn't as common among 40k games as you would think. I've recently started working on some videos around Warhammer's plethora of digital titles, and when looking at my favourite genre of my youth, which is the first-person shooter, I was actually shocked to see there were just so few of them out there. It may be, depending on how you define the first-person shooter, less than a dozen of these, less than 10 of them. And since 2015 we've had 3 of those. So there's a growing trend. More on that in a moment. But the lack of shooting games is a weird one to me. Whilst I understand that Warhammer is a tabletop strategy game that would lend itself to being emulated or adapted or transformed into varying real-time or squad-based isometric or turn-based games, it shocks me that one of the industry's largest genres has gone largely neglected within the IP. For 2 decades, Halo and Call of Duty dominated the landscape, and all we got in that time was Fire Warrior, which sucks more than I thought it would, having gone back and played it a bit. This game is bad. And Space Marine, which is one part Gears of War and another part kind of maybe God of War. It's an interesting one, but it's hardly the shooter you'd expect from Warhammer 40k. There was not one Space Marine-centric Halo clone in that time, or an Astra Militarum-centered Call of Duty or Medal of Honor alike. It just seems like a massive oversight, like money left on the table. But beyond the first-person perspective being weirdly absent and the genre of shooters being unexplored, we also have a matter of perspective and playable characters. If I were to ask you what the vast majority of 40k games, the good, the bad, and the downright terrible, what faction took centre stage, I'm almost certain you could tell me what one it is, right? It's not hard. This is not a difficult question. Space Marines are the power fantasy, the macho extremity of brotherhood and war, manifested to bulky super soldiers laden in ceramite armour and carrying enough martial prowess and firepower to defeat a modern day army on their own and all that jazz. And 40k is a lot about power fantasies. It's about escapism, I get that. But where the fuck are all the normal people? Where are the gangers on the hive cities, the planetary defense forces, the Astra Militarum, and then, hell, if we really want to get artsy-fartsy with it, how about the lowly imperial citizen first confronting a run-in with the chaotic rhetoric of the dark gods? It's all missing. It's all, for the most part, absent. Of course, things have been improving in recent time. Mechanicum, being a turn-based XCOM-esque title where the Mechanicum go up against the Necrons, is a breath of fresh air in a sea. Can you get a breath of fresh air in the sea? A breath of fresh air in the sea of Imperium and Space Marine-focused video games. But again, it's not relatable. It's not the sense of scale that I'm talking about here. In the future, there is only war, and war can have some seriously profound effects on its populace, and this can lead to interesting storytelling, whether that be from the perspective of a civilian like I've suggested. It's not really common you get that in video games anyway, let's be honest. Or even not getting as wild as that, like the expeditionary fleets on the fringes of the galaxy, the explorers of the rogue traders, or the average Catachan commando stalking the jungles of a death world on patrol. 40k has always had a Space Marine problem on the tabletop, and that does seem to reflect itself in its games too. But beyond war, this is a world in which the forward-reaching tendrils of the Hive Fleet of Tyranids will launch guerrilla campaigns against future targets by affecting the populace of a world with the genes of the alien. Cults rise up. Imagine stopping one of these as a local enforcer on a backwater hive world in an isometric dialogue-driven RPG. And on the topic of hive worlds, why is there not a Hive City Builder game, where you take on the role of multiple generations of the same ruling class, the same ruling family, as you build out through the ages of the Great Crusade, right up to the present day, the 41st or 42nd millennium, having to deal with meddling Imperial agents, gene stealer cults, chaos influence. Look, I don't know exactly how it would play. I'm picturing Tropico meets SimCity meets Judge Dredd, but I'm not just the ideas man, alright? But the concept alone would make me buy it. We of course got to see the underbelly of the Hive world recently in a couple of games. Hired Gun, most recently, a janky but fun first-person shooter that certainly looked the part. I thought visually it was glorious, even if it felt a bit cheap when you started playing. Problem is, and I use the word problem loosely as I found this to be an appealing part of the game, I actually quite enjoyed it, not that I finished it, that's maybe indicative of how good it is, but the game was looking to be Titanfall meets Doom. You're a lowly ganger on the Hive world of Necromunda, but you can wall run, you can double jump, you can hook shot off the ceiling and bounce on people's heads like Mario bouncing on Goombas. It's fun and it's frantic, but it still fails to scratch that itch that I'm talking about, that tension of being a human in this crazy world. The most recent release is Darktide, and it's a hell of a lot of fun and I'm enjoying it. You play as an ex-convict, a normal human, or a mutant psycho or Ogryn, I guess, who is essentially one part of a team of Rambos. You cut down hundreds, if not thousands, of poxwalkers, cultists, mutants, and even demons as you go about each mission. And this isn't a criticism of the game. The game is fantastic fun, in spite of its real issues, like a lack of features at launch, connectivity, and stability issues. But this is more so an observation. There is no tension that the world is cruel or unforgiving in the micro sense, because it's a cooperative PvE shooter where hordes make up the primary creature type. This is essentially within a genre that demands that kind of thing. There's a reason it feels like Left 4 Dead, because Left 4 Dead created this kind of genre of co-op shooter. So it's unfair to expect it to do something different. It's unfair to expect it to be a survival horror, even if it does iconographically or visually look like that in its trailers and marketing materials. I'm not saying it was misleading. Anyone looking to buy Darktide and doing even a few seconds of research to understand what they were getting into, I'm just saying it hinted at something that doesn't exist yet, that I'd like to see. So even when we're playing human convicts or gangers, we're just mowing down the opposition without the tension that the 41st millennium should put into people. 40k's mythos owes a lot to Lovecraftian style of horror. Creatures from beyond space and time with machinations that we can't begin to understand. We are but pawns in their great game, and that's if we can even make heads or tails of said game. Ultimately, the average Joe should feel fear in the face of the Tyranid swarm, or the great game of chaos, or even a rogue faction of the Imperium. People should be scared when they see the Angels of Death. And in all of this, there should be a vulnerability. Where the fuck is my 40k Eternal Darkness, with sanity or corruption mechanics and a story where you unravel the plot to summon eldritch monstrosities, a chaos cult in your hive world? And I'm only half joking there. I think it's a tragedy we haven't had a survival horror in universe, something that plays like Alien Isolation or Eternal Darkness, two of my favourite games of all time. Or if you don't want to go deep down the lack of power play fantasy route, you don't have to go all the way in on survival horror. Something at least like the original Dead Space, or Resident Evil 7, or even Resident Evil 4, where action is a focus, but you are a clumsy human with awkward handling, and fighting more than a handful of poxwalkers becomes a serious threat. And on that note, why have we not had like an Eisenhorn or Inquisitor style RPG or action adventure? Why is that a thing that's never happened? I guess there is Inquisitor Martyr. There is the 40k game, which is a bit like Diablo in how it plays, honestly. Yeah, I guess that exists, but it doesn't really deal with anything other than bare bones combat. 40k games are obsessed with combat and violence and fighting, and they never look to really explore much more than that. One thing I would say about Darktide is that it's good with its dialogue and its visual storytelling of examining what fanaticism within the Imperium actually looks like. Way more than any other video game I have played. It was like a breath of fresh air in that sense. It feels like a Black Library novel for being so rich in that way. Ultimately, I think these quibbles are going to be addressed in due course. In the last half a decade, we've had 2 Necromunda titles, Blood Bowl has gained huge amounts of popularity in the last decade, a Mechanicum-centered title came out, like I said, and now a co-op shooter based around Humies and a side-scrolling orc shoot-em-up. The world of 40k in video games is ever expanding, more so now than it ever has. On the horizon, we do have Rogue Trader, an isometric RPG which at time of recording is the first in the intellectual property in video games, which is wild to me. How has this not happened sooner, considering there have been tabletop RPG systems for this game since its inception? Hell, original Rogue Trader, like first edition of Warhammer, was a tabletop RPG mixed with a war game. How have we not had an isometric RPG up to this point? It's absurd. So in short, I'm extremely excited for Rogue Trader, and I'm loving Darktide when I can get logged in and it's not just failing to connect. Hell, Bolt Gun, a Doom clone, is coming up. And that's going to be a day one purchase for me because I love these style of games. I'm not saying action-orientated first-person shooters and other styles of games are bad. I'll be doing more videos on those as time goes on. I'm just saying that I would love the fragility of the human condition to be explored just once. Because 40k is such a great setting with so much depth and potential. Hell, Horus Heresy as a setting and book series largely spends its time fleshing out not only the mortal supporting cast, but also giving motivations and personality and backgrounds that you can empathise with for the Primarchs and the Astartes. How is there 0 games based upon Horus Heresy, barring one fun card game? I say this, but we all know the first Horus Heresy game we get from here on out is going to be an action-oriented title with absolutely bare minimum dialogue between the characters. I just want to engage with the personal and not just cut down hordes of Xenos and zombies all the time. That's all. Let me know what you think in the comments section below and tell me what your favourite 40k video game is and why. I want to look back at some of them for videos, so I'm always looking to learn and find out interesting things about them. Thanks for watching, I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.